The first bullet came through the chandelier. It happened so fast that the 300 guests in the Drake Hotel ballroom registered the sound only after the crystal had already begun to fall. A shimmering, slow-motion rain of glass over the white roses and the gold-rimmed champagne. Ava Whitlock felt her new husband move before she understood there was anything to move from. 1 second, Roman Castellano was standing beside her in his black tuxedo, cold and unreadable as he had been all evening. The next, she was pressed to the floor beneath him, his body a wall of muscle and silk over hers, his hand cradling the back of her head so that the marble wouldn't open her skull. Screams, overturned tables, the wet, ugly thud of a man going down near the orchestra. And through all of it, against her ear, Roman's voice, calm, terribly calm. The voice of a man for whom gunfire was simply weather. "Don't lift your head," he said. "Do you trust me?" She didn't. She had married him 11 days ago, and she didn't trust him at all. But her body answered before her pride could, and she went still beneath him, her wedding dress soaking up the spilled champagne, her heart slamming against the floor as if it wanted out of her chest. "No," she whispered. She felt him almost smile. "Good," Roman said. "Then we understand each other." A second shot cracked. He covered her completely. And in that instant his blood, she would realize later, already running warm down his arm and onto her bare shoulder. Ava Whitlock had a single clear thought, sharp as the falling glass. "He's shielding me. He hates my father. He married me to destroy us. So why is he the one bleeding?" To understand the answer, you have to go back. The Whitlock estate sat on the North Shore behind iron gates and old money, and Ava hated every cold inch of it. She had been raised in those marble halls, the way some children are raised in museums, taught to admire the surfaces forbidden to leave fingerprints. Her father, Marcus Whitlock, was the most feared prosecutor in the state, the man the newspapers called the Lighthouse, because they said he dragged the darkness into the light. He had put away 3 Moretti capos, 2 crooked aldermen, and a chief of police. He had a wall of commendations, and a voice that could quiet a courtroom by lowering, not raising. And he had a daughter he loved the way a king loves a crown, as proof of legacy, not as a person. Ava had escaped the only way she knew how. At 22, she'd stopped letting his money pay for her life, finished nursing school on loans, and taken a job in the emergency room of a hospital on the South Side, where the patients arrived with knife wounds and overdoses, and the particular exhaustion of people the city had given up on. Her father called it a phase. Her father called everything that wasn't his idea a phase. It was a Tuesday in October when he summoned her to dinner and told her between the soup and the fish that she was going to be married. "His name is Roman Castellano," Marcus said, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "You'll have heard of him." Ava set down her fork. Of course she'd heard of him. Everyone had heard of him. Roman Castellano was the head of the Castellano family, the youngest man ever to take that chair, the one even the other bosses lowered their voices around. He owned half the waterfront 3 casinos, and according to her father's own press conferences, a great deal of blood. "You spend your career trying to imprison men like him," she said slowly, "and now you want me to marry one." "I want," her father said, and his eyes were very calm, very pale, "to get close to him. He proposed the alliance himself. He believes a marriage into a prosecutor's family will give him protection, legitimacy. He's wrong. It will give me a window into his world that no warrant ever could." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and his hand was cold. "You're not a sacrifice, Ava. You're an asset, the best one I've ever had. Do this for me. Do this for the family name." She should have run. She thought about it for 9 days, but she had spent her whole life being told she was an asset, and somewhere in the rot of that house, a part of her still wanted just once to hear her father say she'd made him proud. So she said yes. She had no idea that the man she was being handed to had requested her by name. That Roman Castellano had spent 17 years preparing for exactly this. That the proposal her father imagined was a fly walking into his web was in truth the web itself. The first time Ava met Roman alone, it was in his penthouse, 62 floors above the lake, and the entire western wall was glass. He was standing at it with his back to her, when his man showed her in, looking out at the storm rolling off the water, and for a long moment, he didn't turn. He let her stand there. He let her feel the silence. The penthouse was beautiful, and frigid black marble white orchids. Not a single photograph, not a single soft thing. A house built by a man who owned everything, and kept nothing. When he finally turned, Ava understood why people lowered their voices. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dark hair, shot with the first threads of premature gray, and his face was the kind of handsome that felt like a warning. Beautiful, the way a cliff edge is beautiful. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were a gray so dark they were almost black, and they were utterly without warmth. They moved over her once, head to foot, the way a surgeon examines a chart, and she felt herself catalogued, weighed, filed. "You're smaller than your photographs," he said. His voice was low and even. "You're colder than yours," she answered, before she could stop herself. Something flickered behind those dark eyes, not amusement, not quite, but the ghost of where amusement used to live. He crossed the room toward her, unhurried, and stopped closer than a stranger should. "Let me be clear with you about what this is," Roman said. "You will live here. You will wear my ring. You will appear at my side when I require it, and you will smile when the cameras find us. In return, you will be the safest woman in this city, because everyone in it knows what happens to people who frighten the things I protect." He paused. "I do not want your love. I do not want your fear. I want your cooperation. Is that something you can give me?" She lifted her chin. She had grown up in a house of cold men. She had learned young that the only thing they couldn't stand was a daughter who refused to flinch. "You spent a great deal of effort," Ava said, "to acquire a wife you intend to ignore. Why?" For 1/2 second his composure slipped. It was the smallest thing, a tightening at the corner of his jaw, gone almost before it arrived. But Ava had spent 6 years reading the faces of people trying not to show pain, and she saw it. He's lying about something she thought, and it costs him to do it. "Good night, Mrs. Castellano," Roman said, and turned back to the glass. Here is what Ava didn't know that first night standing in the cold cathedral of his living room. Roman Castellano had been 12 years old when his mother and his 9-year-old sister Lucia were driven off the lakeshore embankment by a black sedan that the papers, the police, and eventually the courts all agreed had been a tragic drunken accident. The driver of the sedan was never found. The case was closed in 41 days. The prosecutor who closed it, who personally assured the grieving Castellano family that justice had simply, sadly, run out of road, was a hungry young assistant district attorney named Marcus Whitlock. It took Roman 17 years, $100 million, and the slow, patient corruption of 3 men inside Whitlock's own office to learn the truth. The sedan had not been drunk, it had been paid. Roman's father, the old Don, had refused to launder money for a rising rival, a butcher named Vincent Moretti, and Moretti had answered the way men like Moretti answer, by killing what the old Don loved most. And the man who made the killing disappear, who buried the file, who took the Moretti envelope and used it to buy his first house in Winnetka, was Marcus Whitlock. Whitlock had been Moretti's man from the very beginning. His entire glittering crusade against organized crime was a magician's trick, a war waged loudly against the Castellanos and quietly for the Morettis, eliminating one family's rivals under the holy cover of the law. The city's most celebrated lawman was the underworld's most valuable asset, and he had built a shrine to his own virtue on the graves of a woman and a little girl. Roman could have killed him. He had imagined killing him 10,000 ways. But a bullet was mercy, and Marcus Whitlock did not deserve mercy. Whitlock loved exactly 2 things in this world: his reputation and the daughter he was grooming to inherit it. So Roman had decided in the cold, patient way that had made him what he was, to take both. He would marry the daughter. He would walk her into the heart of Whitlock's life. And then when the time was right, he would release the evidence in a way that ensured Whitlock's downfall came through his own family, his own house, his own blood, so that the last thing the great prosecutor ever lost was the legacy he'd murdered children to protect. The girl was a tool. A beautiful, sharp-tongued, inconvenient tool. He had told himself that 100 times before the wedding, and he believed it completely. He was very good at lying. He had just never tried to lie to himself about her. She didn't behave like a tool. That was the first problem. A hostage cooperates or rebels. Both are predictable. Ava Whitlock did neither. She moved through his cold penthouse and left it warmer. She put orchids in water. She argued with his housekeeper about whether the staff should be allowed to eat in the kitchen instead of leaving the building for meals, and won. She came home from the hospital at 4 in the morning with someone else's blood dried under her fingernails and fell asleep on the white sofa with her shoes still on. And Roman, who did not sleep, found himself standing in the dark, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, a thing he could not have explained to a single man who feared him. The second problem was the camera. Roman had wired the penthouse the day he bought it. He wired everything. He watched her on a monitor in his study, the way he watched everyone because information was survival. But he found over the weeks that he was watching the wrong feed. He was watching her feed. He watched her video call a frightened teenage patient she'd treated, and stay on the line for an hour past midnight, talking the kid through a panic attack, her voice soft in a way she never let it be soft with him. He watched her cry once silently in the kitchen, holding her phone, and then wash her face and put on the cool armor she wore around him, and walk into the next room and ask him with perfect composure to pass the salt. A man can armor a house. A man can armor his life. Roman Castellano had armored his heart so thoroughly that he'd half forgotten he had one. But you cannot armor against witnessing kindness in a world you'd written off as ruthless, and he was witnessing it every single day in his own home, from the very weapon he had chosen to destroy his enemy. The night it truly began to crack, there was a storm. She'd come home shaking, not from the rain. There had been a stabbing in her ER, a man who died on her table while his daughter screamed in the hallway, and the man's brother had blamed. Ava had grabbed her, had put his hands around her throat before security pulled him off. She didn't tell Roman this. She told no one. She just walked into the penthouse, pale and trembling, and went to the glass wall and stood there in the lightning, her arms wrapped around herself. And Roman watched her from across the room and felt something he had not felt since he was 12 years old. He felt afraid for someone. "Who touched you?" he said. It was not a question. She turned. There were faint marks on her throat. He had already seen them. He had already, in the space of one heartbeat, made a decision that no amount of strategy could justify. "It's handled," Ava said. "Security. Who touched you?" And she looked at him. Really looked the way you look at a stranger you suddenly suspect of being something else. And she said his name, just his name, Roman, in a voice that was equal parts warning and plea. And Roman crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He lifted one hand slowly, the way you approach something wild, and his fingertips hovered a breath away from the bruises on her neck. He didn't touch her. He wanted to. He wanted it with a violence that frightened him. But touching her would mean admitting the thing was real, and so he held his hand there in the air between them, trembling almost imperceptibly, and Ava felt the heat of it against her skin and didn't breathe. "No one will ever touch you again," Roman said quietly. "Do you understand me? No one. I will turn this entire city inside out first." It was the wrong thing to say. It was a confession dressed as a threat, and they both knew it. The man who attacked her was found 3 days later alive, but ruined, having signed a sworn confession and fled the state. Ava never asked. She had begun against every instinct she owned, to understand exactly who she'd married, and to feel beneath the fear, the far more dangerous thing, which was that, for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen not an asset, but a person worth burning a city for. The trouble was that he was burning the city for her father, too. She just didn't know it yet. He took her to the Moretti charity gala because he needed to be seen, and because somewhere in the rotten machinery of his plan, he wanted Marcus Whitlock to look across a ballroom and see his daughter on the arm of his enemy, and not be able to do a single thing about it. What Roman had not planned was the way she looked in the deep red gown. He had not planned the way Vincent Moretti's son, a sleek, smiling animal named Luca, would look at her either. Luca Moretti approached them by the bar, all white teeth and old grudges. He kissed Ava's hand a half-second too long. He called Roman old friend, with the particular contempt of men who have inherited their father's wars. And then he leaned close to Ava and murmured something Roman couldn't hear. It would never know exactly what it was, only that Ava went very still and her smile turned to glass. Roman set down his drink. Across the room, Marcus Whitlock watched his daughter and his enemy and the Moretti boy with the bland public smile of a man at a charity gala. And Ava, glancing past Luca's shoulder, caught the look that passed between her father and Vincent Moretti, the old Don, the man her father had spent his career promising to destroy. It lasted a fraction of a second, a nod, the easy, private nod of men who know each other well. She filed it away. She didn't understand it. But Ava Whitlock had spent her childhood learning to read the silences of dangerous men, and that small nod went into her the way a splinter goes in deep and quiet to fester. She did not have time to think about it because Roman had crossed the floor. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply stepped between Ava and Luca Moretti, put one hand flat against the younger man's chest, and said something so low that only Luca heard it. And whatever it was drained the color from Luca's face and made him step back and bow slightly to Ava and disappear into the crowd. Roman turned. He offered Ava his arm, and as he led her out of that ballroom under the watching eyes of the city, his jaw was tight and his eyes were black. And for the first time, he was not pretending to be possessive. He was simply possessive. And it terrified him more than any gun ever had. In the car in the rain, neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Ava said into the dark, "My father and Vincent Moretti know each other." Roman's hands went still on his knees. "They looked at each other like friends," she went on, watching the city smear past the rain-streaked glass. "My father has spent 20 years swearing to put that man in the ground. So why do they look at each other like friends?" The whole plan hung in the air of that car. Roman could have told her then. Part of him, the part that had been quietly defecting for weeks, wanted to. But he looked at her profile in the passing light, and he understood with the awful clarity of a man watching his own life capsize that the truth would not destroy her father. The truth would destroy her. It would take the one pillar her whole identity rested on. "My father is a good man. My father is the light," and pull it out from under her. And Roman, who had spent 17 years dreaming of that exact demolition, discovered that he could not do it, not to her. "Your father," he said carefully, "is a complicated man." "That's not an answer." "No," Roman agreed, "it isn't." And he reached across the dark seat and for the first time took her hand. He did it the way you diffuse something. He held it. She let him. The rain came down in sheets over the black car as it slid through the neon city, and the two of them sat in the dark, holding hands and lying to each other, each protecting the other from a truth that would have changed everything. Which is the most dangerous kind of love there is, the kind built on the things you cannot bring yourself to say. She found it on a Sunday. Roman was gone a meeting at the waterfront, the kind he didn't explain, and Ava was alone in the penthouse for the first time in days. She wasn't snooping. She told herself that later, with a bitter laugh. She had only been looking for the spare key to the wine room, and the panel beside the study bookshelf had given under her hand, and behind it was a door. And the door wasn't locked because Roman trusted no one enough to imagine anyone would ever get this far. The room was small and windowless and lined with steel, and it was full of her. Photographs, hundreds of them, pinned and filed and ordered with a meticulousness that stopped her breath. Ava at the hospital. Ava at nursing school. Ava at 22, at 25. Candid shots taken from a distance, years before she had ever heard the name Castellano. He had been watching her long before the marriage, long before the proposal. The obsession in that room was so total, so patient, that it should have frightened her, and part of her was frightened. But a larger part of her, the part she would be ashamed of forever, felt something hot and unbearable bloom in her chest. Because no one in her cold, bright life had ever wanted to know her like this. But the photographs of her were not the worst thing in the room. On the far wall, separated older, was a different file. A child's photographs. A dark-eyed boy and a smaller girl laughing on a beach. A woman with Roman's exact eyes. Newspaper clippings, yellowed. Mother. Daughter killed in lakefront crash. A case file, photocopied. Stamped the official seal of the district attorney's office. And clipped to the front of that file in the corner, a younger man's photograph, sharp-suited, ambitious, signing a document with a fountain pen. Her father. Ava sank to the floor, with the file open in her lap, and she read it, and the room went very far away. She read the original accident report, and then she read the second report, the one stamped sealed, the one with the toxicology that didn't match, and the witness statement that had been withdrawn, and the bank transfer. God, the bank transfer. A number and a date, into an account she recognized because she had seen it on her own family's documents her entire life. She read the name Vincent Moretti in her father's careful hand. She read the words, "Handle the Castellano matter, closed, per VM," in the margin of a memo signed M. Whitlock. The boy on the beach was Roman. The little girl was Lucia. The woman with Roman's eyes was his mother. And her father, the lighthouse, the man who had handed her across a dinner table like an asset, and asked her to be proud of the family name. Her father had taken Vincent Moretti's money to bury the murder of a woman and a 9-year-old child, and then had spent his entire shining career using the law as a weapon to finish the job, hunting the survivor, the boy on the beach, the man she had married. She understood everything in one cold, collapsing instant. The proposal, the marriage, the thing Roman could not say. He had married her to destroy her father, and he had every right in the world to do it. She was still on the floor when Roman came home and found the panel open. He stood in the doorway. She looked up at him with her father's file in her hands, and tears running down her face, and the look on his own face caught naked, undone, was the most human thing she had ever seen on him. "How long?" Ava said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. "How long have you been planning to use me to ruin him?" 17 years. He didn't lie. He had stopped being able to lie to her somewhere around the storm. "I plan to release the evidence through you, through this marriage, so that when it ended him, it ended his bloodline, his name, everything he loved." He swallowed. "Including you." And now, Roman Castellano, who had never in his life asked anyone for anything, took one step into the room that contained the wreckage of both their families, and his voice broke on the words. "Now I can't," he said. "Now I would burn the evidence, and let him win before I let it touch you. That's the mistake, Ava. That's the fatal mistake. I built my whole life to destroy him, and I can't do it because doing it means losing you, and I—" He stopped. He had run out of armor. "I have nothing left to protect myself with. You took it. You took all of it." She stood. She crossed the room. And for a moment they simply looked at each other across the photographs of his dead sister and her father's crime, two people standing in the rubble of everything they'd believed. And then Ava did the thing that ended the war in both of them. She set the file down. She put her hands on his face, and she kissed him, fierce and furious and grieving kissed him, like a woman setting fire to her own past. And Roman caught her against him, as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. And outside the glass, the storm came in off the lake. But love does not stop a war that's already been declared. It only changes who the war is for. Marcus Whitlock was not a stupid man. He had given Roman his daughter, expecting to slide a knife into the Castellano family. And instead his daughter had stopped returning his calls, and his sources inside Roman's organization, the three men Roman had long since identified as Whitlocks, and had been feeding false information for months, went suddenly ominously quiet. Whitlock understood, with the instinct of a predator, that the board had turned, that somehow the daughter he'd planted had been turned against him. And Marcus Whitlock had never in his life let anything he couldn't control continue to exist. He called Vincent Moretti. The plan was elegant in its way. There was an old Castellano property on the south side, a deconsecrated cathedral the family had bought decades ago and never sold, the place where Roman's mother and sister were buried in the crypt below. Whitlock knew Roman went there on the anniversary alone every year, and the anniversary was in 2 days. Whitlock's offer to Moretti was simple. Moretti's men would take the cathedral. Roman would die there, among his dead, and it would be ruled a gangland killing, one more body in a war the great prosecutor had warned the city about for years. And Ava who had become a liability, who knew too much, who had chosen the wrong side. Ava would be there too, an accident, a daughter who'd fallen in with a dangerous man and paid the price. Tragic, useful, final. He was her father. He looked at her photograph on his desk, the one from her nursing school graduation, and he ordered her death, and he felt nothing but the cool relief of a problem being solved. What Whitlock didn't know was that the fourth man inside Roman's organization, the one Whitlock had never identified, was Roman's right hand, a quiet old soldier named Dante, who had carried the boy Roman out of the morgue the night his mother and sister were laid out on steel tables. Dante heard about the cathedral 6 hours before it was set to happen, and Dante told Roman. Roman did not tell Ava. He told her he had business. He kissed her at the door of the penthouse and held her face 1 second too long, and Ava, who could read the silences of dangerous men who had been reading them her whole life, knew he was lying, and knew it was the kind of lie a man tells when he's planning to die. She followed him. It was raining when she got there. Black SUVs ringed the abandoned cathedral, their headlights cutting the downpour, and through the broken stained glass came the flat, ugly percussion of gunfire. Ava abandoned her car at the curb and ran, and the rain plastered her hair to her face, and one of Roman's men, bleeding, dragging himself toward cover, grabbed her ankle and gasped at her to get down. Get down. And she didn't, because somewhere inside that ruin was the man she'd married. And she had spent her whole life being told to stay safe in marble rooms, while the people she loved made their choices without her. Not this time. She went in through the side door, into the wreck of the nave, and what she saw she would never forget. Roman bleeding from his side and his arm, his white shirt soaked dark, was crouched behind a fallen pillar, holding off Moretti's men with a calm that looked in the candlelight from the dozen votives he'd lit for his mother, like something out of an old painting, a saint or a devil. You couldn't tell which. Dante was down. 2 of Moretti's men were down. Luca Moretti was screaming orders from the shadows by the altar. And standing in the doorway of the apse, dry, untouched, holding a small pistol he had almost certainly never fired in his life, was Marcus Whitlock. Ava. Her father's voice cut across the chaos, and for a moment the guns hesitated. He looked at her with an expression of genuine paternal grief. And that was the most monstrous thing of all, that he meant it. "Sweetheart, come here, come to me. This isn't your fight. I'll get you out. Just come to me and this all stops." And Ava stood in the center of that ruined church, in the rain coming through the shattered roof, soaked to the skin, and looked at the father she had worshipped her entire life, the man she'd married, a monster to make proud. And she understood that she had a choice, and that the choice was the whole of her, everything she was and would ever be. "You killed his mother," she said. Her voice carried clear in a lull of the guns. "You killed a little girl, Lucia. She was 9, Dad, and you took money for it. And then you spent 20 years pretending to be the light." She was crying, and she didn't care. "And you sent men here to kill your own daughter." "Ava, don't." She had her phone in her hand. She had had it the whole time. "It's already uploaded," she said. "Everything in the file, the toxicology, the transfer, the Moretti memo, your handwriting. I sent it to 3 reporters and the Inspector General 11 minutes ago, the moment I saw the SUVs. So whatever you do here tonight, it's over. The lighthouse goes out tonight no matter what." For one frozen second, Marcus Whitlock looked at his daughter the way you look at a stranger. Then he raised the gun and pointed it at her. A father pointing a gun at his child to protect a reputation. That is what the underworld does to a man. Not the violence, but the moment the violence makes perfect sense to him. Roman moved. He had been bleeding out for 10 minutes, and he should not have been able to move at all. But he crossed the nave in a dead sprint and put himself between Ava and the muzzle, and Whitlock fired, and the bullet that was meant for the daughter took the husband high in the chest, and Roman Castellano, the most feared man in the city, the boss the other bosses whispered about, went down at Ava's feet in a spreading dark pool, having spent the very last thing he owned, his body, to keep her standing. Whatever happened next happened fast. Dante, not as dead as he'd looked, put 2 rounds into Luca Moretti from the floor. The surviving Moretti men, leaderless, broke and ran into the rain. And Marcus Whitlock, staring at his daughter, cradling the bleeding man in her arms, his crime already racing across every server in the city, did the only thing a man like him had ever known how to do. When the light finally found him, he ran. He made it to the cathedral doors. He never made it past them. Vincent Moretti's people, who had been listening to a police scanner that was already by then repeating Whitlock's name, had decided that a burned asset was a dead asset, and there were 3 more black SUVs waiting in the rain who did not work for the prosecutor anymore. He vanished into the dark, and the city never saw Marcus Whitlock alive again, and the great crusade against the underworld ended exactly where it had always secretly lived, in the back seat of a Moretti car. But Ava didn't see any of that. Ava was on her knees in the broken cathedral, her wedding white hands pressed to the wound in Roman's chest, doing the one thing she had trained her whole life to do, screaming his name, ordering him to stay. "You stay with me. You do not get to leave me here. Do you understand me? Do you trust me?" And Roman Castellano, gray-faced, looked up at the only soft thing in his entire armored life, and the ghost of where amusement used to live flickered one last time in his dark eyes. "No," he breathed, and then, "always." And his eyes closed. He did not die. It was a near thing, surgeons would tell her later, that the only reason he lived was that the woman holding him together on the cathedral floor had known precisely where to press and how hard, and had not let go for 19 minutes until the ambulance she'd called arrived. The bullet missed his heart by the width of a wedding ring. There is perhaps no metaphor in that. There is perhaps only the truth, which is that Ava Whitlock saved the life of the man who married her to destroy her family, and would have done it again without a heartbeat's hesitation. The story broke the way a dam breaks. Prosecutor exposed as mob asset. Whitlock crusade a lie. The Inspector General's office moved within hours. The Moretti family, gutted by the loss of Luca and the death of the man who'd protected them inside the law, collapsed within the year. And the name Castellano, the family Marcus Whitlock had spent his life painting as the city's great darkness, emerged in the strange arithmetic of the underworld as something almost like the wronged party. The boy on the beach had outlived everyone who'd taken his family from him. Ava sat by his hospital bed for 11 days. There was a particular thumbnail to that too, if anyone had been there to see it. The prosecutor's daughter in a hard plastic chair, holding the hand of the sleeping mafia boss. The morning light coming gray off the lake through the window. Both of them, survivors of the same man's cruelty. Finally, on the same side of it. He woke on the 11th day. She was asleep with her head on the edge of the bed, her hands still in his, and he lay there for a long while, just watching her breathe, the way he'd watched her on the white sofa a lifetime ago. Except now there was no monitor between them, no plan, no armor, nothing left to protect himself with, and nothing left he wanted to. "You should run," Roman said quietly when she stirred. His voice was a wreck. "You know what I am. You know everything now. There's still time for you to have a clean life, Ava. You could walk out of here and never look back, and no one in this city would ever touch you. I'd see to it." Ava lifted her head. Her eyes were red and her hair was a mess, and she had never, he thought, looked more like a thing worth burning a city for. "You married me to destroy my father," she said. "Yes. And instead you took a bullet to save my life." "Yes." She leaned in very close, the way he had once held his hand a breath from her throat, and not dared to touch, and now there was nothing between them at all. "Then you don't get to tell me to run," Ava whispered. "You don't get to be the one who decides what I deserve. I've spent my whole life letting cold men in marble rooms decide what I was worth." She pressed her forehead to his. "I'm done with that. I choose this. I choose you, not because I'm a pawn, not because I'm an asset, not for anybody's family name, because somewhere in that frozen, terrifying, ruined heart of yours, you saw me. You're the only one who ever saw me." Her voice broke. "So no, I'm not running. You're stuck with me, Roman Castellano. Try and survive it." For the first time in 17 years, for the first time maybe since a black sedan went off the embankment and took everything soft in him with it, Roman Castellano laughed. It was rough and quiet, and it clearly hurt his chest, and it was the most beautiful sound Ava had ever heard. He lifted her hand to his lips. He kissed the wedding ring he had put there to start a war. "Then survive it I will," he said. Outside the hospital window, the storm had finally passed, and the lake lay flat and silver under the breaking clouds. And somewhere in the city, the wreckage of two families was being sorted into headlines, and indictments, and graves. But in that gray, quiet room, 60 floors below the penthouse where she'd once stood alone and unloved, the prosecutor's daughter and the mafia boss who'd been sent to ruin her held on to each other in the early light. Two people who had each been raised by cold men in cold houses to believe that love was a weakness the world would use against them, and who had discovered far too late to be safe, and exactly in time to be saved, that it was the only thing in all that darkness worth more than revenge. He had married her to destroy her father. He had ended up destroying only the part of himself that could live without her. And in the oldest, coldest city in the country, in a world of black SUVs and rain-slicked streets and men who feared nothing, that turned out to be the one war the most dangerous man alive had been desperate all along to lose.